Hey everybody, today we're going to be breaking down an Airy Meet Cute cue using Hollywood Orchestra. Let's have a listen. So let's go ahead and set the scene. I thought for this particular cue, it'd be fun to do an animated type meet cute, something you might see in Pixar or Ghibli. Looking at the main hit points of the cue, we have the opening where the meet cute starts, and then we have the moment of anticipation, and then floating away. My thought behind these three hit points was that in the narrative of this fake scene, two characters meet each other at the meet cute start. It could be played out like a classic meet cute, and then we have this moment of anticipation where one of the characters shares their feelings for the other. This could be played out as this quirkiness and awkwardness based on uncertainty. Then finally, we have them coming together and this resolution of them floating away in love. Now that we have the scene set, let's get into the theory. So over in the notes section of Logic, I have written down the chords and the scales or modes I have associated with those chords. So to start off the cue, I can go ahead and play the original melody I came up with on the piano. I came up with this chord progression by building off the four notes in the first chord of this song, that being G, A, C sharp, and D. Going back to the notes, you can see I have outlined what scale and mode I want to keep the melody and any accompaniment in as I modulate between the different key signatures. This is something I try to do to glue the entire piece together. I personally think when you are modulating between different key signatures, having something consistent between the different chords and keys will help tie the entire piece together. So for me, it was using suspended chords and keeping the piece in Lydian as much as possible. For the first half of the cue, I wanted to make this as open and airy as I could. So I decided to use suspended chords to make this opening feel as floaty and unclear as possible, similarly to how at this particular hit point, our characters are feeling the same way about each other. So to go through the chords, I start with a G sharp 11 sus2, and then I have an A major 7 13 sus2. And for this particular chord, I have the strings playing B to give us the suspended 2. And then from there, I have a C sharp minor 7 9 sus4. And in this particular voicing, I am omitting both the C sharp and E in the harp, but the violins are picking those up for me. And then the last chord is a D major 7, and I wanted that chord to be solid. So I am playing all the notes and keeping D in the bass. And in my opinion, this D major 7 is the only chord out of those four in the opening that feels the most grounded, and you can kind of wrap your head around that the most. And I did that because I want the transition from D major 7 to D7 to be very emphasized and dramatic. So for the anticipation part, I am going from that D major 7 to a D7. I chose D7 because D7 will naturally resolve to the G major 7, which is the opening chord of the theme. During the main theme, I chose to keep the voicing with the root note in the bass to keep it solid in terms of where we are harmonically. So the chord progression changes to G major 7, A major 7, And instead of playing a C sharp minor 7, I chose to move up a third and play E major 7 to keep everything nice and bright in major. And then lastly, we end the cue with a D major 7, 9. To start the cue, I wanted to break up the melody between the different sections of the orchestra. I thought about the idea of our two characters having a conversation. So I tried to mirror that in the score by passing the melody around and having the different sections of the orchestra have a conversation with each other. As far as the harp and piano in the opening, the harp is doing the original chord progression I came up with, just broken up rhythmically to have a conversation with the piano, and the piano is responding by alternating between chordal and quintal chords. If you don't know what chordal and quintal chords are, chordal chords are built upon fourths, and quintal chords are built upon fifths. I think chordal chords sound dark and mysterious, while quintal chords sound bright and airy. So contrasting these two adds a nice touch to the conversation and gives it a sense of uncertainty, backing up the narrative. All of the string patches are consordino, and I have the violins playing flautando in the opening. They are using chordal and quintal voicings as well, and I tried to fill in the gaps where the piano and harp are missing notes within the chords, and I gave those to the violins to fill that out. The viola is doing its own little melodic line that makes a return during the main theme section, and it's just playing the original chord progression I came up with, just broken up into a different rhythm to add movement. So getting into this anticipation part of the cue, I have the violins, viola, and cello doing a tremolo section, while the bass is doing a pizzicato. The bassoons are also mirroring the bass. They are all just starting on a different note of a D7 chord and going up. So the high woodwinds are just doing some embellishing. They're doing some runs and some trills. I really wanted to use them just to add some excitement and movement to this anticipation section of the cue. One of my favorite parts of the whole song is the piano during the anticipation part. It's running up a D major scale but playing C natural instead of C sharp, and the harp is doing a glissando up an E minor scale but starting on D. Again, this is all just to emphasize that dominant seventh of the D7. So from here we are at the floating away hit point, and I have the first and second violins playing the main melody, but they are playing it octaves apart. One of my favorite parts about the Hollywood Strings library is the ability to pick which finger position the strings are playing. I chose 4th position to give the melody a warm, rich sound, and for this particular patch I'm using the legato bow change slur plus portamento, and the SM at the end of that stands for smooth legato transitions. I have the bass and cello playing a pizzicato line an octave apart, and I'm using the loose pizzicato patch, and they are bouncing between the root and the 5th, and that is being doubled by the bassoon's staccato again. The viola is playing the first melodic line it did at the beginning of the cue, and that is being doubled by the clarinet and oboe, but the oboe is doing a slight variation of it, just to emphasize different notes and fill out the harmonic spectrum. Also, I have them doing some embellishments to emphasize the E major change. All three of these sections are walking up an E major 7 chord, but I broke it up between the clarinets and the oboe to give them a chance to breathe. Lastly, the flutes are just doing some major trills and runs throughout the end to add some movement and airiness to the song. The last two parts of the piece are the harp and piano. I have the harp and piano doubling each other until the end, but they are just running up the chords. And then at the end, I have the harp playing this big D major 7, 9, sharp 11, 13 chord to wrap up the piece and emphasize the Lydian feel of the song. Briefly, I will go over mixing and mic positions. I wanted the piano to be this lovely texture in the background, so I lowered the close microphone in the mix and used the soft pedal for most of the track. So when I'm using software patches, I typically like to use a majority of the mic positions and just feather them out differently depending on what kind of sound I want. I think it adds a lot of depth and space to the sound. Here's the mic setup for the harp, although I didn't use the close vintage microphone. And this is the same setup for the glissando patch. All the strings have the same mic position setup, and it looks just like this. I wanted to emphasize the main and mid mic positions, but have enough of the close microphone to allow the strings to pop out of the mix. However, with the flautando patch, I didn't use the close mic because I wanted it to just be this background texture. On all the audio tracks, I did a little bit of my own flavor of EQ just to make all the strings sound a little warmer. And I do pan them out slightly just to add some room in the mix. For the woodwinds, I used the same microphone setup, but I lowered the close microphone gain more just to make the embellishments more of a texture rather than pop out and distract from the foundation in the strings. I did flip the seating arrangement of the woodwinds because I wanted to separate the flutes and the violins so that they had their own space in the mix. So instead of being on the left, they are now on the right, and so on with the other woodwinds. I just used the gain plugin in Logic and turned on the swap. For reverbs, I'm using East-West Spaces 2. I'm using the Southern California Hall front. I'm using the string preset for the strings, the choir for the woodwinds, since they don't have a woodwinds preset in this particular reverb, and I'm using the percussion for the harp and piano. All of the buses are being sent to a lexicon emulation from East-West, and that is the Digital Hollywood Hall 5.2. I do have some presets in Ozone 8 I've created, and I like to use those just to add some saturation and grit to the samples. I'm using the vintage tape saturation. I'm also using an exciter with the analog preset just to add some noise into the samples. I'm using an imager to give the mix some more space. And then lastly, I have an EQ just to make some adjustments to some frequencies. I'm also using the side channel to remove some bass frequencies from the sides and center up the bass even more. Overall, I think using East-West Orchestra is an amazing tool in writing a cue like this. The variety of articulations within the sample library is amazing to add excitement and movement to a track like this. I love the fact that I can pick which finger position and add consordino to all the strings to add a richness and a warmth to them. I will say that if I owned East-West percussion, which I don't, but if I did, adding some cymbals and some glockenspiel for accents would have been a nice touch as well. If you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up would be very appreciated. If you have any ideas for any cues or sample libraries you'd like me to test out in this particular way, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Thanks and have a great day.